What you mean you don't eat no meat? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies film breakdown series with my big fat Greek wedding. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I have a lot of videos diving into these topics much deeper, but a brief summary: masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies. We all have a core energy. This is when we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. And we can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. And each of these energies contains archetypes. We all contain all of the archetypes within us that we can tap into whenever we need to. I have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes if you want to learn more. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine, because opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's get to my big fat Greek wedding. This movie is actually one of my favorite rom-coms. It's just a fun movie. I am not the least bit Greek, but I kind of feel like I am when I watch this movie. I thought this movie would actually be a really great opportunity to talk about sort of these stereotypical old world, old school ideas about masculine and feminine, and actual masculine and feminine energies that are beyond those traditional roles. So my big fat Greek wedding actually really focuses on the culture of being Greek, and I'm not going to take anything away from that aspect of this movie. That said, a lot of these traditional values, these traditional perspectives, these traditional ideas about, you know, family, sons and daughters, parental roles, things like that, like, you could really apply these same mentalities, same ideas, these same sort of stereotypes, these same kind of traditional ideas and values to a lot of other cultures. So kind of this idea of you're just supposed to get married young, have a lot of kids, run the family business, and, you know, everyone takes on their traditional roles and everybody has a specific role that they have to follow. It's supposed to be not questioned because you're just going to follow this path. Women become mothers, men become fathers, men are the head of the household, like that whole kind of mentality. Those things they're beyond just Greek traditions. Those are actually traditions that you find in many, many, many other cultures. Now, I personally did not grow up in a culture like that. In fact, if you're familiar with the movie, and I'll get into the characters a little bit later, but my background was actually much more like Ian's. I identify with him, I think, a little bit more in this movie because I'm an only child. I grew up in sort of a just more like yuppie kind of a environment, a quiet family, a small family. He even mentions in the movie, which I'll get to his character a little bit later, but he mentions in the movie that like his father was a lawyer, his grandfather was a lawyer, he was supposed to be a lawyer and it just wasn't for him, and he kind of rebelled by going a different way. I'm supposed to be a lawyer running a law firm right now. I'm clearly not. So yeah, I identify with kind of a lot of his story and a lot of his like upbringing more than I do the other cultures. Like, I didn't grow up in an environment where I was told like, you're a woman, you're supposed to have the babies and get married and blah blah blah. Like, I'm supposed to be like this like corporate boss babe. Like, that's how I was raised. I clearly rebelled from that, so the idea that I have much more traditional values is actually more of a rebellion than it is something that is conforming to a culture. That said, as much as I admire people who have certain values and stick to those values, and I'm not here to tell anybody what they should think or what they should believe at all, there are aspects to tradition that don't really fit into the idea of what masculine and feminine energies actually are. Some do and some don't. It's actually interesting. Somebody asked me, I believe here on YouTube a while ago, if I considered myself traditional. It's tough to answer because I think that I have certain beliefs and values, and somebody else may hear that and be like, wow, that's really old school traditional, and other people might hear it and be like, ooh, that's very modern and radical. It really does depend on your background and your values, and my own personal values would probably be considered very traditional in our very modern society. However, two very old world, old school, traditional families, my values may seem very radical and very out there. So that's why I think it's really difficult when you label someone as traditional, because it's like, okay, but whose tradition are you following? You know what I mean? Like, it's not, and not every tradition is exactly the same. There's obviously going to be some overlap. There are certain roles that women have kind of always traditionally played. There's certain roles that men have always traditionally played. But in general, traditional is kind of a difficult thing to really pinpoint, which is why I tell people, like, honestly, like, find your values, find your beliefs. Like, you can use other cultures, other, you know, belief systems, religion, family, things like that as inspiration, but it's really important to find out where your values lie as opposed to just copying somebody else's. Because if you just copy somebody else's values and never really tune into your soul and figure out what you want, you very often go down the wrong path. And I actually have a video talking about soul needs versus ego needs and stuff like that dives into that deeper, so I highly recommend you check that out. So my Big Fat Greek Wedding centers around Tula. And Tula's family, very Greek, very traditional. However, if you notice that all of the men in this traditional family are embodying a lot of very wounded feminine energy. So wounded feminine energy tends to fall into victimhood a lot. It tends to be people pleasers, tends to fall into addiction sometimes, tends to have a lot of neediness, and lacks direction, lacks focus, lacks the ability to set boundaries, to have discipline, things like that. A lot of the women in this movie tend to be in very wounded masculine, where they need to be aggressive, they need to be bossy, overly controlling, those kind of things. Like, they fall into that category. In this traditional environment where the men are supposed to be like the masculine leaders, many of them are actually pretty lost in their victimhood. And a lot of these women that are supposed to be these sort of subservient, so to speak, women are actually very aggressive and controlling. And I think that that's something that really, it's really common nowadays, and not even just in traditional families, but in general, overall. The father in this movie, he's very emotional. He's always crying. He's no control over his emotions. He's very much in victimhood mode. I mean, literally, when Tula comes to him and says she wants to go to college, he just starts crying, and he's like, why do you want to leave me? He has this vision. He wants her to do something, but he's not really a take charge, take control kind of guy. He really is playing the victim all the time. It's like, oh, things aren't going the way I want it to. My daughter's not doing what I wanted to do. I'm just gonna cry, I'm gonna whine. He's critical of her, which is a little bit more wounded masculine. But yeah, he's very much in victimhood. Like, I don't know what to do. He's, you know, he just kind of always feels like he's the victim, which is very much a wounded feminine mentality. You also notice that, and I don't actually know what his name is, but Tula's older sister, Athena, her husband, you only meet him briefly, but he just is like whining and complaining about how his wife's always nagging him and this and that. Very often, if you have a nagging wife, you're gonna have a victim husband on the other side. They go together. Like, if you have a wife that's nagging and you have a husband that's whining, you're rarely ever gonna find those situations separate. Now, whether or not the husband is whiny and that makes the wife naggy, or whether or not the wife is naggy and that makes the husband whiny, like, that's a chicken or egg situation. It's hard to know which came first. But if you have a nagging wife, you're almost always going to have a passive whiny husband. If you have a passive whiny husband, you're almost always going to have a nagging wife. They go together. Like that, it's reverse polarity. It's the husband being in wounded feminine and it's the wife being in wounded masculine. The wife is being overly aggressive and the husband is being overly like passive and his victim. Goes together. It's so common. It's almost unusual to not see a relationship like that. And it's portrayed a lot in the media. Nick, Tula's brother, who I actually think is a really good guy. I'm gonna get to him later because I do think he's a good guy, but he's kind of lost. Like, he's desperately looking for his father's approval. He works for the family business, but he's kind of like, yeah, I'm kind of lost. Yeah, no, I'll get married at some point. He doesn't really have much direction. He doesn't really have much focus, at least in the beginning of the movie. So the men who are supposed to be this very traditional masculine men are all very much in their wounded feminine. They're victims. They're whiny. They don't have control over their emotions. So they're not really embodying masculine leadership. On the flip side, the women in this family, Athena, who's the older sister, who is described as basically like got married young and is just, you know, a Greek baby making factory. When you meet her, she is so aggressive. She's so telling everybody what to do. She just walks in and it's like, I'm just going to tell everybody what to do. She's bossing everybody around. She's snapping at her sister. You can tell she micromanages everything. Like, that idea of what a mother is, like that mothering, that's not divine mother energy. I have a lot of videos talking about the difference between divine mother energy and mothering energy. Divine mother energy is nurturing, and you see that at many times with Tula's mom, which I'm going to get to. But Athena is the epitome of the mothering, the dominating mothering idea. She obviously has sons. She's like keeping them under control. She's the boss. She tells everybody what to do. She's micromanaging their schedules. She is very much aggressively in her wounded masculine, I would say. There's definitely moments when Tula's mother has to get into her wounded masculine. She has to be the smart one. She has to be the one in control. She's not consistently in wounded masculine, but she really does have to be the rock of the family, because her husband is kind of spinning out of control most of the time, in victim, whining, crying, emotional. Like, she's got to be the stability. She does a really amazing job of that, and I'm going to get to her character in a minute, but she's more masculine. She has to be the one in control and in charge. So the women in this family really do tend to have to be more of the masculine aggressive types, because the men in the family are in their more wounded feminine types. So even in this like traditional life where we think of like, oh, if the woman stays home and raises the kids, she must be a feminine woman. If the man is going out and working and, you know, is the head of the household, well, then he must be in his masculine. And if you see in this situation, it's not like that at all. Like, you don't actually have men who are taking charge, who are leading from a very grounded place. And you don't have women who basically can follow the man's leadership. In many cases, these women actually, in fact, that's kind of a thing where Tula's mother has to convince Tula's father that everything was his idea. And I know that that's like a stereotype that a lot of women have to do. Like, they think that that's leadership. She's still leading. She's still leading. She just has to let her husband think that he is leading. That's not true leadership. That's not true leadership when you have a woman who has to appease her husband's ego to make him think that he's making the decisions and leading. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't certain circumstances where that may need to happen, but if that's happening all the time, as a wife, it's gonna wear on you, because eventually you're gonna be like, hey, why do I have to constantly convince him that it's his idea? Because that just takes a whole lot more time and energy that you don't have. That's exhausting. Trust me. I know, it's exhausting. I've experienced this. If you don't have a man whose leadership you feel like you can trust because it is stable and it is grounded, and you have to become the leader, and you have to appease your husband's ego by making him think that he's the one making the decisions and that he's the leader, that's gonna burn you out. And there's a lot of women today, I think, who are burnt out because they're in that dynamic. Whether or not, like, movies like this one or similar movies, sitcoms have this dynamic in it a lot. Whether or not that's like art imitating life or life imitating art, hard to know. But I would say that that's why a lot of women are exhausted and burnt out. A lot of women are anxious. They're constantly having to be in charge, but then, and very often in cases where they have a husband who's got some ego issues, if she has to make him think that he's in charge while she's in charge, so he's getting all the credit, and she's getting what she wants, but she has to give him the credit for making the decisions and taking the leadership, but he's not actually taking the leadership. Think about how, like, that's exhausting for me to even say. Like, I don't even know if what I just said made sense, because it's exhausting to even say. So you can see why women are just so burnt out from this. So if you don't have men who are stepping up and actually taking the lead and being the leaders of their household, and from a grounded, stable place, and not from an ego place. Now, if Tula's father had his set in his ways, this is the only way, this is the way it's always been done, this is the way it has to happen, if he had that in his head, and he had been like, you know, the leader of actually leading the house, he probably would have been a tyrannical leader and would not have felt safe for his family. If he had shifted into wounded masculine and he had been that aggressive, take charge, well, again, like tyrannical leader of the family, that wouldn't have felt safe either. That's why it's really important for, if you're going to be the father of a household, if you're going to be the man of a household, it's really important for you to find that grounded, stable leadership, that leadership that is trustable. Leadership that comes from ego does not feel trustable. Leadership that comes from like an unstable, wounded, feminine, emotional state, that's not going to feel trustable either. You need grounded masculine leadership in order for whoever you're leading. In this case, it's a family, but it could be any situation, a boss even. Like if you're going to lead a business or a company, it's that grounded, stable leadership that's going to sustain you. People may follow your wounded masculine leadership out of fear, but they're not going to be able to sustain that because it's probably going to burn them out. And if you have this sort of emotional, uneasy, people-pleasing, like unstable, wounded feminine leadership, everything's probably going to fall apart. That's why grounded, stable, masculine leadership is so essential. And women have a lot of healing work that they need to do as well. When women are in their wounded masculine, they get naggy, they get aggressive, and they don't know how to trust masculine leadership. That's going to be a problem as well. So women do need to learn to tap into their feminine energy and to understand how to tap into trusting masculine leadership. But if they don't have trustable masculine leadership to follow, it's not going to happen because somebody has to take the lead. Like somebody has to do it. And to be honest, if you have a woman who is stable, unless you have a woman who is in her wounded feminine, so she's in people pleaser mode, she's in her victimhood, like unless you have somebody like that, most women, like even in their healthy feminine, if they don't have a partner whose leadership they can trust, they're probably going to shift into their masculine. It may be healthy masculine, it may be wounded masculine. It's going to depend on the woman and depend on her triggers and her upbringing and what her wounds are and things like that. But somebody's going to have to lead. Like somebody's going to have to take the lead. If it's not the man, it's going to have to be the woman. And it's not going to be as natural for her. Like it's probably going to wear on most women to have to take the lead all the time. Some women may thrive in it, but that's not that common. Even women who are very good at taking the lead, it's still going to wear on most women over time, and it's going to burn them out. And in reality, that wounded masculine place of women always having to be in their masculine energy, even if it's healthy masculine, but if you always have to be in your masculine energy as a woman, most women, that's going to lead to anxiety. And we're seeing such a rampant spike in anxiety in women. That wounded feminine energy in men that you see in so many of these men in this movie, that leads to depression. And you're seeing a huge, huge increase in depression in men. It's the wounded feminine. It's their victimhood. They're literally living in victimhood. They're not in their natural masculine leadership, and women are not in their natural feminine receptivity. It's causing a ton of mental and physical health problems. So again, I mean, I'm not saying that these sort of old school traditions are necessarily a bad thing, but if you as a man are like, hey, the man is the head of the household, the man is the leader, the man's in charge, you need to know how to lead. If you as a woman believe that being a mother and having children or raising your children and nurturing your children is important, you're gonna need to learn how to connect to that feminine nurturing aspect of you. And you're gonna need to be able to submit to solid, trustable masculine leadership. This movie, great example of the fact that these people are following their traditional roles, but they're not in their natural core energies throughout most of the film. Tula is a really great example of a woman in the beginning of the movie. She's very shut off from her feminine energy. She's not so much in wounded masculine, I would say. Like she doesn't so much have a lot of masculine energy. She's a little bit more wounded feminine, I would say, in the fact that she is in more of a victimhood. Now, granted, she has a father who's been telling her that she's an old woman since she was 15 and pressuring her to settle down and get married, and that's obviously not really where her heart is. She is in this place where she doesn't really know where to go, and none of this is meant to be a judgment. Like I understand, like I can identify with this aspect of things a lot, is this idea that you feel like you have to follow a certain path that was laid out for you, and if you don't feel in your heart like that's your path, you can fall into victimhood mode. You can fall into, you start fantasizing about what life would be like somewhere else, or if life was different, and you start to feel hopeless. And Tula has a real block to being seen. Like she literally is covering herself up, covering herself with layers of clothing. I'm not talking about like just wanting to be modest or anything, but she clearly is uncomfortable. So many moments she literally is like hiding in plain sight. Like she'll like hide behind a counter, or you know, she'll kind of hide behind a wall, or she constantly kind of is hiding because she's afraid to be seen. The feminine longs to be seen in her full radiance, and Tula is so blocked from that. She's got a lot of wounding in her feminine energy. She's afraid to be seen. She's people people pleasing, and she's doing exactly what her parents are telling her to do, you know, going to work and doing what she's supposed to do. She hasn't met anybody, she hasn't gotten married, but she's just, you know, kind of going through the motions of everyday life. She's not really getting any joy or pleasure out of life. She's just so closed off from everything. And it's not even just about how she looks. She calls herself Frump Girl at one point, but she just isn't comfortable with herself and her own skin. She's just so uncomfortable to watch, and watching this, I definitely related to that. I know that, you know, she compares herself to kind of like the thin blonde girls and stuff, and I get it. I actually wasn't blonde back in that day. In fact, when you see Tula as a little girl and she refers to herself as like a swarthy kid or something like that, I'm like, yeah, I was the swarthy one for sure. That kind of always feeling out of place wherever you are, like that was me. I identify with that completely. So I saw a lot of myself and a lot of my experiences in life when I was young and things like that. I saw a lot of myself in Tula for sure. Afraid to be seen, afraid to speak, not comfortable with your body, not comfortable like covering yourself up and trying to like downplay your beauty and your radiance and things like that. Like I was like that a lot when I was younger, so I very much identify with Tula. Tula decides, she gets this idea in her head that she wants to go to college. Whether you go to college, whether you don't go to college, whatever it is that you do, it's not about the specific thing that you do, but what Tula did was she had a passion for something. She had a desire to do something, to see new things. It wasn't necessarily even about the classes she was taking. She wanted a change of environment. She wanted a change of scenery. She wanted to explore different things, explore her curiosity. That's all her feminine energy. Now, you don't have to necessarily like take a college class in order to do that. You don't have to get a college degree. You don't have to do any of those things. You can if you want to, if that's something that really sparks a desire in you. That doesn't make you feminine, but it's following that desire, following your passion, following your intuition. Those things are connecting to your feminine energy, whether that looks like taking a college class, whether it looks like taking a class somewhere else, whether it looks like getting in the kitchen and cooking and doing something that is, you know, stereotypically feminine. Like whatever it is, it's following that desire and that intuition and mixing it up, trying something new. Like that's what connects to your feminine energy. And as she did that, what it did was it actually increased her confidence. She had been just going through the motions so much. The feminine is not designed to just do the same thing every day. The feminine is not designed to just go through the motions all the time. The feminine is designed to mix things up. Our whole society in this kind of like very repetitive, every day you do the same thing, it's very masculine. Men are on a 24-hour hormone cycle. So men are designed to do essentially the same things every day, to have a routine. The feminine is not designed to have that routine. The feminine actually has a, on average, 28-day hormone cycle, which is, you know, it varies from woman to woman. Women are designed to be doing something different every day, depending on their body and where their body is in their cycles and where the cycles of the moon. And the feminine is meant to mix things up. And when Tula mixed things up, what it did was it inspired her to do other things. Now, many of the things in this movie, because it's a rom-com, it's a fun movie, it's from a certain time period, it's in the early 2000s, I believe. She starts wearing makeup and experimenting with contact lenses and doing her hair differently and changing her clothes. All that is very superficial feminine. However, those things can help spark that feminine energy from within you. Like you can put on like a pink outfit and a pretty skirt. That doesn't make you feminine. But if you put on a pretty outfit and a pretty skirt, it makes you feel in your body. You really appreciate your body and you feel good in your body. That's your feminine energy. And sometimes just, you know, maybe putting on a little bit of makeup or putting on a cute outfit or doing your hair a certain way. It's whatever makes you feel good, right? And I think sometimes, you know, it's like that fake it till you make it, right? I mean, one of the ways that I started reconnecting with my feminine energy was very surface level. It was like, hey, I want to rediscover my love of makeup again. I want to rediscover my love of beauty products and, you know, rediscover my love of, you know, having like a home spa day or things like that. Like it was very surface stuff in the beginning when I first kind of started my feminine energy journey. But that surface stuff led to me wanting to take things deeper and actually really connect to the feminine energy within me. But I think sometimes as a woman, if you feel very disconnected from your feminine energy, from your pleasure, from your sensuality, try something new. Try doing something different with your hair. I mean, I don't mean like don't all of a sudden cut off all your hair or do bangs or, you know, change the color or whatever. But maybe just, you know, try a little bit different style. Or if you're into makeup, makeup, you're not into makeup, that's fine, doesn't really matter. I'm very big on non-toxic products right now, so I'm not trying to convince everybody to go out and just like buy a whole bunch of beauty products or anything like that, but it can look however you want it to look. You don't have to necessarily emulate exactly what Tula did or what I've done or anything like that. What makes you feel good? For some women, it's gonna make them feel really feminine to put on like a really like, you know, bodycon dress and feel very sexy. For some women, it's gonna feel very feminine for them to wear really flowy dresses. Like, start experimenting with the things that make you feel feminine, whatever your flavor is. And it's actually really interesting too, because at the end of the movie when Tula is like ready for her wedding and she's like, oh my god, I look like a snow beast, like that's not her flavor of feminine. She let her family do her up for her wedding, and it's actually after her and Ian get married, and she's kind of like wiping it all off, and Ian's kind of telling her to like wipe some of it off and stuff. It's like she's trying to get herself to feel more of her own version of feminine, because she has her family's idea of what they think being a feminine woman is, or what she should look like on her wedding day, and she has her own version. She's so much more relaxed in herself when she's in her own version of being feminine. And you know, I think it's really important to not get this idea that like, oh, okay, if you wear a pretty bow and a pink outfit, then you're automatically a feminine woman. That doesn't make you feminine. It's what's inside that makes you feminine. And if that look, if that image makes you feel more feminine, then go for it. If being more in like an, you know, earthy outfit makes you feel more feminine, it's great. I mean, my grandmother was very feminine, but she always dressed like she was ready to go for a hike because she just loved to be out in nature. That was her version of feminine energy. Everybody's got their own version of what feminine is. It's just really important for you to connect to it. And you can try different things along the way. I mean, especially if it's a different outfit or trying to do your hair differently, as long as you're not doing anything dramatic. Feel into what feels good for you. That's connecting to your feminine energy, is like feeling into your intuition and what's feeling good. And when Tula started doing that, everything she wanted in life started lining up, right? She ended up with this great opportunity where she could essentially kind of work for herself. She was kind of taking over her aunt's business and kind of do her own thing. And so she was really gaining confidence in herself. And that's like when Ian magnetized to her. She had this crush on Ian. She'd noticed him before when she was, as she calls herself, frump girl. He kind of noticed her, but kind of didn't. And then she gained all this confidence and she was feeling really good in herself. She was feeling really beautiful. That's when she magnetized him to her. Like, that's when he became so enticed by her that he like had to come and talk to her, because he was just so drawn to her. That's what that magnetism is, right? As a woman, she didn't have to chase Ian. She didn't have to go running him down and find him and be like, oh, are you gonna call me? Are you into this? Are you into that? No, because Ian came to her, because when she actually stepped into the best version of herself, that's when everything that she wanted just started kind of coming into her life when the time was right. And even in the beginning, when Ian first notices her, like, she hides at first because she's still afraid of being seen, and as time goes on she becomes more and more comfortable. So it's also a great reminder that, you know, these things take time. You don't automatically, you know, change your look and all of a sudden you're healed. Like, you kind of gotta baby steps, like take one step at a time. And you know, when you are healing your feminine energy and connecting to yourself and connecting what you want, that journey is gonna look individual to you, and because it's your path and you're an individual person, and to give yourself some time and patience. I think those are the biggest lessons that we can learn from Tula's journey. I think, like, from throughout this whole movie, is that she gets everything she wants, but it has to come in the right timing, and it has to come when she's ready for it. And you know, the more that she works on herself, she works on her confidence, on what her version of being in her feminine energy actually is, that's when things start coming into her life, as she starts figuring out what she wants as opposed to what everybody else is telling her to do. Now, Ian, I mean, I want to call him Aiden. I feel like I'm like, it's Aiden Shaw, right? Ian, I mean, again, he's like tall, handsome. I wouldn't necessarily say he is like an overly masculine character. Like, he is a little passive. He is a little passive. John Corbett plays this character pretty much. Like, he's like Aiden. He was like naturally masculine at his core, but he was a little bit more passive. And I think Ian is pretty much the same way. Now, Ian does mention at one point that, you know, like I said before, he was supposed to be a lawyer. He was supposed to follow, you know, in the family tradition, his father, his grandfather. It wasn't for him. He decided to get into teaching because that's what he was more passionate about. That shows a lot of masculine direction, because in order for many men to step into their masculine energy, they really have to let go of that need to please their father. That's a big hurdle that I think a lot of men have to go through, because a lot of men are doing the things that they're doing in life to please their father. And a big hurdle to men actually tapping into their full masculine is to learn to separate from their father, which really just means they need to separate from that neediness. They can still have their father in their life. They don't have to not have anything to do with him or cut him off completely, but they have to let go of that need to please their father, of that neediness to make their father proud of them. They need to be able to walk their own masculine path. It's part of it. If you're going to be a masculine leader, you need to be able to find your own path and lead your own path and lead your own vision. And if you're leading somebody else's, you're not really the leader of your family, your business, your ship, whatever it is that you're leading. One thing about Ian, though, is actually when we first meet him, and he's actually in Tula's family's restaurant. He doesn't know Tula yet, and he's just having a conversation with his friend. It was his friend's idea to come to the restaurant, and his friend has obviously been like fixing him up with women, and his friend basically is like, hey, do you want me to fix you up with this woman? And he's like, oh, you already fixed me up with her. And he's like, no, I fixed you up with this other woman. And he's like, well, but they look the same. And he's like, well, do you want me to fix you up with her? And he's like, they're all the same. Ian is feeling very much in a rut. And that's actually pretty common with the masculine. Very often the masculine can feel like, you know, he's doing the same thing every day. He's got the same routine. The feminine is kind of what mixes that up. Like, the feminine is anything that brings pleasure and sensuality. And Ian is really feeling like he's just meeting the same woman over and over and over again. And his life needs some spice, actually, which is interesting because Ian doesn't have time to eat because they have to leave, and he just kind of grabs like a potato, I think he said it was, off of his friend's plate, and he eats it, and he's like, what's the spice on this? It's really good. And his friend's like, oh, I don't care. He's looking for spice in his life. Like, it's that similar. He's looking for some kind of spiciness. Him and Tula meet actually in the restaurant. Tula's kind of in her, as she calls it, her frump phase. She's obviously like completely intoxicated with Ian, and he kind of notices her, like not fully, but she's still very like covered up, like even not even just like physically, but she's really trying to hide herself. And she even makes a joke about being their own private Greek statue, and Ian laughs because it's that moment of playfulness, of fun. It's like Tula just like let a little of that peek through, and Ian was very intoxicated by it. She shut it down again, like it got very shut down again, but then, you know, they move on. They reconnect later on, and now of course she's in a different place. She's really connected more to her feminine energy, and that's when Ian comes to her. He doesn't realize that he's met her before at this point, and they go on a few dates, and he actually realizes that she is the waitress that he met before. And it's interesting because she's very self-conscious. She's like, oh, I was frump girl. He was like, I don't remember frump girl, but I remember you. Ian fully sees her. The feminine longs to be fully seen and witnessed by the masculine and accepted for all of who she is. And Ian really is enticed by all of who Tula is. Like, even the parts of her that she's self-conscious about, her past that she's self-conscious about, all the things that she's unsure of and uneasy of, Ian is so welcoming. That's all. It's such a deep desire of the feminine. It's actually interesting on a separate subject because I have a breakdown of Yellowstone, and I actually have a video clip of Beth and Rip on Yellowstone that's actually gone viral on TikTok. And I've seen a lot of people talk about the appeal of Rip on Yellowstone, which is a very different character than Ian. However, one of the things that so many women are acknowledging is really important about Rip is that he fully sees Beth and accepts her for who she is. It's a deep desire of women, is we want to be seen in all of us, like not just the pretty polished us, but we want to be seen in our messiness and still loved and accepted. We want to be seen in the chaos, in the mess of our lives, and have a masculine partner still love us and love us for that, not just in spite of that. All the things that Tula, going back to this movie, all the things that Tula is so self-conscious about, Ian loves that about her. And that's, oh, it's so relaxing to the feminine's nervous system to be fully seen and witnessed and accepted for who she truly is. And that's so beautiful about Ian, is that he really does love all the parts of Tula that she hasn't even learned to accept within herself yet. So Ian's trying to find out more about Tula as they go out on dates, and she's really embarrassed about her family. He's trying to get her to kind of tell him more about her, and she basically is like, look, I don't know how this is gonna work. My family is big, it's loud, it's crazy, you know, you're a non-Greek, I don't know how anything accept it, like I don't know how this is gonna work. And he has some really great lines in this movie, and one of the things that he says is, my life up until now has been boring until I met you. Like the masculine can often find life a little bit boring, a little bit dull. Masculine life can be very bland. And I think most men, if they're masculine at their core, like that. I mean, tends to be a way that the masculine can thrive, is on things being somewhat boring, somewhat cold. However, the feminine brings in the spice. It brings in the spice of life. You know what I mean? Like the masculine is very much the structure, and the feminine is like the flavor. It's the spice. And that's what Tula brings in. And when they're planning their wedding, Tula's kind of in this emotional storm, and she goes to Ian and she's like, oh, let's just elope, let's just run away, let's go here, let's go there, let's just run away because, you know, my family is just too much and everything is too much. And like, Ian is so grounded. He's like, I love you, I'm gonna do what you want. Now he's a little bit passive with her family, I will admit, and I understand that that's an intimidating situation, and I'm not saying that out of judgment, but he doesn't do a great job of actually, like, I mean, he does stand his ground quite a bit. Like, you know, when Tula's father is kind of in his emotions and this and that, like, you can't date my daughter, you didn't ask for my permission, blah, 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 blah. He's just like Tula, like, I'll see you tomorrow or whatever. Like, he kind of stays very grounded and focused. So he does do a good job of that. He's a little bit passive, lets himself get pushed around a little bit and whatever, but you know, the situation is what it is. So, you know, I understand it's a delicate situation. I would like to see Ian step more into his masculine energy and be more of a leader, but he is good at being grounded. And Tula's in this emotion, and he's very grounded and stable. He's like, I love you, we're gonna get married, we're gonna do what we need to do. Oh, the line that Tula is just like, you know, why do you love me? And he's like, because I came alive when I met you. Very often when you have a masculine being, when he meets the right feminine woman, he can feel like his life all of a sudden came alive. It's like the masculine is living in black and white, and then the feminine comes in and everything turns to color. It's the flavor. It's that the feminine is the flavor. The feminine is the beauty, the radiance, the light. It's actually interesting too at one point when Ian actually says earlier on, when he says that his life had been boring, and he meets Tula and he's giving Tula all these compliments and saying that she's all these things, and he says she's beautiful, and she kind of stops. She's like, you think I'm beautiful? That's what she notices, because she didn't feel beautiful, and that compliment, oh, the feminine being complimented on her radiance, on her beauty, that's the best compliment you can give a feminine woman. For the masculine, it's giving him a compliment on his direction, on his passion, on his purpose. For the feminine, it's on her beauty and radiance. Like, women want to be seen for their beauty and radiance. Men want to be seen for their leadership, their direction, their purpose. Like, they want to know that they've done a good job. They want to know that their accomplishments are important. They want to know that they're respected. The feminine wants to know that she's cherished, that she's loved, that she's admired. So yeah, they don't have like a really like hot polarity, because it's not extreme, but they do have a beautiful, like, I think that their relationship is a great example of like a subtle polarity. He's masculine and she's feminine, but they're not in their extremes. They're just in a very subtle masculine, subtle feminine. And I think Ian does have a connection to his feminine side, and Tula does have a connection to her masculine side. So they're not necessarily in the extreme. I think in a lot of these film examples, you can get really like extreme characters. In everyday life, you know, it's usually less extreme. And I think Tula and Ian are a really great example of, like, they have the polarity. It's just more subtle. It's more subdued than you would see in some other like extreme polarized relationships. Tula's mother, she has some really, really great lines in this movie. I love her character, even though she does definitely have to take on the masculine role in her family a lot. When she is with Tula, she's so warm and nurturing. She's so loving. She's got that divine mother energy within her. One of my favorite lines, this is possibly one of my favorite movie lines ever of all time, is, you know, when Tula wants to go to college, she approaches her father to like get permission, and he's fighting her. He doesn't want her to go. And Tula's mother basically is, you know, I'll talk to him. And she's like, no, the man is the head of the household. And Tula's mother says, well, the man may be the head, but the woman is the neck. And she can turn the head any way she wants to. That is such a beautiful line, because in reality, the masculine is the mind, the feminine is the body. So in this case, she's talking about the neck. The feminine heart, so, you know, this area, is the oracle. It literally can guide the masculine, because it's literally has so much wisdom. It has so much wisdom and intuition. I actually believe one of the most beautiful gifts that the feminine can bring to the masculine is her wisdom, is her inner wisdom, her intuition. Women have this unbelievable ability to know things before they happen, to see the future, to see things. Like, it's not just some kind of, you know, woo-woo thing. Like, it's a real thing. Women have this intuition. And if they can bring that to a masculine partner, and then he can use his mental direction, and you have the feminine leading with her wisdom and the masculine leading with his mind and his masculine direction, that's an unstoppable couple. Now, that's not exactly what happens with Tula's parents in this situation. However, that's symbolic of the masculine is the head and the feminine is the neck, and the neck can move the head wherever she wants. The feminine guides the masculine direction with her heart wisdom. It's not a matter of the woman just saying, okay, I'm just going to blindly follow the man. Like, I don't believe that submission, surrender, whatever it is you want to call it, in the feminine woman is a passive role. She's using her heart wisdom to bring to the masculine all the information that her heart wisdom knows, so he can take that and he can determine a direction. It's a beautiful dance that the masculine and feminine can do with the heart wisdom, the oracle of the heart wisdom, and then the masculine mental direction. Like, it's a beautiful dynamic to have. Now, of course, what ends up happening is Tula's mother ends up basically playing Tula's father and pretends to have this, like, pick a fight with him and challenges him, and she's obviously much smarter than he is, but she has to convince him that he's the smart one, and she basically ends up getting her way. I have to admit, that whole thing, like, she is manipulating him throughout the movie. It's what she has to do to get the job done, and that's their dynamic. I don't necessarily think that that's a healthy dynamic. There are a lot of relationships that thrive on that dynamic. You know, he basically is like, oh, she's smart enough for a girl, and then Tula's mother's like, oh, well, you know, I cook, I clean, I help run a business, I raise 3 kids, I teach Sunday school, but, like, thank goodness I have you to tie my shoes. Like, it's like, I plays the victim a little bit, it's some manipulation. That's not my teaching. That's not how I would advise someone to be in a relationship. However, there are a lot of relationships where that kind of manipulation, like I mentioned before, needing to convince a man that he's made a decision, or needing to kind of manipulate the partner to get the decision you want. I don't really love that level of manipulation and game playing and stuff like that. That's not something that I advise. But in that dynamic, it's kind of what she felt like she needed to do in order to get the job done. Oh, there's another really beautiful scene with Tula and her mom when, you know, Tula's planning her wedding, and she knows that her father is really stressed out about the wedding, and her father really doesn't approve of Ian and his family, and because they're not Greek and he doesn't think they fit in. And Tula's mother basically starts telling Tula about, you know, how, you know, growing up, her village saw so many wars, so much pain, and she was always told she was lucky to be alive, and she thought, no, this isn't living. That they came to this country for their kids, so their kids could live. And she says to her, I'm gonna get emotional when I this, oh my God. She says to her daughter, like, I gave you life so you could live it. That is such a beautiful, it's such a beautiful moment. It's like healing generational curses. It's like her mother was told what to do. She was always, you know, told what her path was supposed to be. She was controlled. And she wanted her daughter to have the choice. She wanted her daughter to be able to live the life that she wanted, to have that freedom, to have that choice. And you see the grandmother come in, and the grandmother is showing her pictures of, you know, her wedding, and Tula's kind of starting to, like, embrace that tradition, to really embrace the fact that, you know, she has come from a generation of some pretty amazing women. You know, Tula gets to be one of those amazing women, and she doesn't have to reject everything about her past in order to live the future that she's living. So, oh, it's really beautiful. And Tula's mother with Tula is just so loving and nurturing. Like, that is divine mother energy right there. It's not that she's not manipulating and controlling Tula. She has to do that with her husband, but she doesn't do that with Tula. She's loving and nurturing with Tula. She's such beautiful divine mother energy. And I want to mention Tula's brother, Nick, because to be honest, like, he's an interesting character. He's not a main character in this movie, but he goes through a really interesting transition. And, you know, it's kind of set up at the beginning that his only job is to cook in the family business and to marry a Greek virgin. And he's kind of like, oh, Dad, I'll get married. And his dad's like, oh, you got plenty of time. Meanwhile, you know, he's bugging Tula about, like, you know, she's so old, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get it. I have a whole video about the value of older women and all of that stuff. So you know, go to that video. I know it's a controversial thing that, you know, I don't think that women just expire at a certain age, and the idea that we just teach men, oh, you've got plenty of time, you got all the time, like just screw up your life for most of your life and whatever, and then, you know, as long as you marry an 18-year-old virgin when you're 50, then you're fine. It's like, I think that's creepy as hell. But anyway, that's another subject for another day. Nick is kind of feeling lost. I mean, if really, he doesn't really have a strong father figure that's really guiding him in his direction. It's kind of like, yeah, just whatever, you'll figure it out, you've got time, right? It's a very passive thing. Nick doesn't really have much direction. Nick has a real passion for art, and he's kind of, at several points throughout the movie, he like does artwork for a new menu and kind of shows it to his father, and his father's like, eh. Like, he's looking for his father's approval. He's got this neediness for his father's approval. Like I mentioned before with Ian, you know, Ian separating himself from his father's expectations was really when he started to step into his true passion and purpose. And Nick hadn't quite reached that point yet, right? Like, he still really wanted his father's approval, and his father's okay with following a certain direction. Then Nick ends up coming to Tula later on and tells her that he's decided to sign up for some college classes because he wants to learn more about art and painting. And Tula's so proud of him, and he's like, well, you started it. Like, that's feminine leadership right there. Feminine leadership is not telling someone what to do. It's not like, do this, do that, do that. That's masculine leadership, which is important to be able to have. Like, there's times when masculine leadership is absolutely appropriate. Feminine leadership is different. Feminine leadership is leading by inspiration. By Tula stepping into her best self and finding herself, and stepping outside of her comfort zone, stepping outside of what the expectations were for her, for the family. She inspired her brother to step into what his true passion was and to step into his purpose in life. You don't have to just tell someone what to do all the time in order to get them to be led, in order to inspire them to step up. Sometimes it's just a matter of stepping yourself up, and you have no idea the people in your life that are going to be inspired to do that too. And I love that moment between the two of them, because it's like Nick had been so lost. In fact, even at one point before, when Nick had tried to get his father's approval of, you know, his artwork for the menu, and his father just fluffed it off, he was like, Ma, get me something to eat. He was gonna eat because he didn't have that approval. Like, he was sinking into something else. The mother's like, okay, sure, I'll feed you. Like, it's like he literally sinks into an addiction. I mean, I'm not saying that he was a food addict or anything like that, but it's like, okay, I'm gonna fill myself with food because I'm not getting this approval or something like that. Like, he falls into that. And when he finally decides to use Tula as an inspiration, and he steps into who he really wants to be, and he's excited about that. It's the first time in the movie he's really excited about a certain path in life. And, you know, I haven't seen the sequel, so I don't really know where these characters end up going or anything like that, but I do think that's just a beautiful moment, that it doesn't necessarily just have to be, you know, in a romantic relationship. It's one person in the family can try to step into, you know, their healthy masculine or healthy feminine, and it can inspire other people in a family to do the same as well. And I think that's really beautiful. There's also a really sweet moment, I think, between Tula and her brother, where Ian basically ends up getting baptized in the Greek church so that they can get married in Tula's church. He's in this kiddie pool, and they're dunking him in water and everything, and, you know, Tula's standing next to her brother in the pews and stuff, and the brother's like, oh, it's not so bad. Tula's like, are you kidding? Any moment he's gonna look at me and be like, oh, you're so not worth this. And her brother goes, yes, you are. And she kind of like nudges him. It's like, Tula doesn't get a lot of compliments other than Ian. Like, she gets, her mother is very nurturing and very loving to her, and her father's very critical of her. And the fact that her brother is just like, hey, you're worth it. Like, you're worth this. Like, it's a really nice moment. Like, they have a really great brother-sister kind of a bond there. And I think that that's really, it's special. You don't really see siblings a lot, I think, especially in movies and, you know, stuff like that. You usually see siblings fighting and arguing, and I think it's really nice that you have these two siblings who are really like inspiring each other and like cheering each other on and building each other up. I think it's nice to see, you know what I mean? I don't have any siblings, so I don't really know much about the sibling experience, but I like seeing situations like this, especially having the media nowadays. You have like the Kardashians that are always fighting, and you have, you know, William and Harry are always, you know, whatever. There's so much like sibling drama in the world today. I just think it's a nice reminder that there are some siblings who actually get along and actually love each other. And if you don't have siblings like that and you have a more dramatic relationship with your siblings, that's okay. I mean, you know, everyone's got complicated relationships with everybody. So I just think it's always nice to see people who are nice to each other, I think. Like, it's just, you don't see it as often anymore. And I just think it's really nice when you see people inspiring each other and lifting each other up. So yeah, I love this movie. I mean, as a rom-com in general, like, the writing is great, the story is great, the characters are great, even though there's a lot of wounding going on in these characters. It's a fun movie. I really love this movie. So if you haven't seen this movie, or even if you have after you watch this video, I encourage you to watch the movie so you can see if you can pick up on some of the things that I mentioned in this video. If you have any thoughts on this movie or any other film recommendations or anything, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you and I love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you are a woman and would like to connect to your feminine energy, I have online courses. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.